I wrapped my wedding pearls in soft tissue, believing she'd treasure them, as I once did. I remember the exact moment. My fingers shook slightly, not from age, but from meaning. The pearls were warm against my palm, softened by decades of touch, of necklines brushed, and tears dried in the mirror. I held them like a heartbeat. It was early morning, quiet as always, and I sat at the edge of my bed, where the sun hit the blanket just enough to make the dust float like lace. I pressed the pearls gently into their box, a faded blue velvet one, then slipped the whole thing into a small envelope lined with her name in my best cursive. It felt like passing down a piece of myself. I didn't have much else. I'd chosen these because they were the one thing I'd kept through every move, every grief, every quiet celebration. They'd been my mother's before me, worn once a year, and kissed with prayers before she fastened them to her neck. I imagined her opening the box, my granddaughter, her eyes lighting up not just at the beauty, but at the meaning. I imagined her showing her friends, saying, "These were my grandmother's. She wore them on her wedding day." I imagined her keeping them safe in a drawer lined with silk or lavender, maybe someday passing them on to her own daughter. I imagined her cherishing me, not in grand gestures, but in those small, reverent acts that hold lineage close. The day of her wedding, I dressed slowly. My hands ached more than usual, so I started early. I wore soft green, the color she once said suited me. I didn't expect to be front and center. Of course not, but I thought I'd be part of something. I wore a modest brooch, brushed my hair back in the same style I'd worn at her mother's wedding, and pinned on a touch of lipstick, though my lips have thinned over time. I looked in the mirror and saw someone hopeful, someone who still mattered. When I arrived at the venue, no one asked me where I'd been or how I was. They greeted me with distracted smiles, eyes darting to phones and hors d'oeuvres. I wasn't surprised, these events are always busy. But I looked for her anyway, my granddaughter, scanning the crowd for the face I once kissed. Good night through chickenpox heartache and high school drama. When I finally saw her walking down the aisle, she looked radiant. That kind of glow you only get once, the kind you borrow from the stars. I squinted, gently proud. I watched her shoulders rise with each step, steady and certain. But something was missing. I leaned forward just slightly. Breath paused and searched her neckline. Nothing. No pearls. She wore a gold chain, delicate and modern, something probably bought to match the dress. Maybe she forgot. Maybe it clashed. I tried to convince myself it was nothing, but the moment clung to me like humidity, invisible, but suffocating. Still, I smiled. I clapped when they kissed. I waved when they danced. I posed for a few pictures, though I don't think any made the final album. I left after dessert, said I was tired. No one protested. Back home, I sat by the window with my slippers still on. I looked at the empty jewelry stand where my pearls had once lived, the little indent, still there in the velvet cushion like a soft memory pressed into time. I told myself to be patient. Gratitude comes in waves. Maybe she'd call tomorrow. Maybe she hadn't opened the box until late. Maybe she'd send a note, or even just a text. I loved them. Grandma, thank you. But the hours passed like whispers in a chapel, soft and sacred and still. I sat with them all night. The thank you never came. The silence was louder than I expected. I thought about how often I'd sacrificed so she could shine the little things. No one claps for saving birthday money to help with her prom dress, staying up late to sew a hem, canceling plans when she was sick. I thought about the time I missed my own anniversary to babysit while her mother was out of town. I never asked for repayment. I only ever wanted to be remembered in the spaces that mattered. Now, in this small, wordless moment, I felt something soft inside me, fray not break, not tear, but loosen, a thread pulling gently from the edge starting to unravel. I didn't cry, I just sat. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like anyone's grandmother. I just felt like a woman alone in her house holding on to a memory no one else wanted. When I saw her wedding pictures online, I noticed she hadn't worn my gift or even mentioned me. The album was posted a week later, filled with light and laughter. Each photo was crisp bright, filtered with that glowing tone the young ones love, a haze that smooths everything as if real life had no sharp corners. I clicked through each image, slowly pausing where I could. There she was, my granddaughter, beaming in every frame. Her gown sparkled, her cheeks were rosy, and around her neck, that same dainty gold chain. No pearls, not in the ceremony, not in the reception, not even in the preparation photos, the ones where she opened gifts, held champagne, laughed with her bridesmaids. And I wasn't in any of them, not even in the blurry background. I looked for myself the way one searches for a misplaced memory, a shoulder, a sleeve, maybe the top of my head. Nothing. Not at the ceremony, not at the dinner, not at the cake cutting. I scrolled twice, 3 times. Still nothing. It was as if I hadn't been there at all. The caption read, "The most perfect day, surrounded by everyone we love." I read it again, then once more. The words sat in my chest like a stone, dropped in wet cement, heavy, final. There's a peculiar kind of pain that doesn't scream. It doesn't stab. It simply leans against you with quiet weight, the way grief does after everyone's gone home. I felt that weight then, pressing, but gentle. I didn't expect a spotlight. I never have. But I thought there'd be something. A mention. A memory, even just a photo that captured me sitting at the edge of the dance floor with my hands folded neatly in my lap, watching her smile. I'd been there. I had shown up. I'd given what little I had left to give. And yet I'd vanished. A strange sort of thought crept into my mind, something small and shameful. Did I mean so little to her? I remembered a different day long ago when she was 5 and I took her to the park. She fell, scraped her knee, and ran into my arms, crying. I wiped her tears with the hem of my shirt and kissed her cheek and said, "You're safe now. Grandma's here." That little girl looked up at me like I was magic, like no one else in the world mattered. What happened to that look? When did I stop being her safe place? I closed the browser window gently, like sealing a door I wasn't ready to open again. The house around me was quiet. It often is these days. The television was off, the phone silent. The only sound was the ticking of the old wall clock above the fireplace, a rhythmic reminder that time moves on even when we don't want it to. I made myself a cup of tea the same way I have for years, 2 sugars, no cream. I sat in my armchair and stared at the steam curling up like questions I didn't know how to ask. I wondered if she knew what the pearls meant. Maybe no one told her. Maybe her mother never said. Maybe in all the busyness, the meaning got lost, buried under registries and color themes and cake flavors. But I had included a note, handwritten, simple. These were my wedding pearls. I wore them when I said I do to your grandfather. I hope they bring you the same strength, the same hope, and the same love they brought me. That was all. Not a lecture, not a demand, just a gift, a piece of my life. And now looking at her pictures, it felt like I'd sent that piece of myself into the void. I didn't know what to do with the ache. I'm not one for confrontation. Never have been. I was raised to hold things in, to smooth wrinkles instead of point to them. But this wasn't just a wrinkle. It was a tear. Something had come undone. I stared down at my hands, veined, delicate, still steady. These hands that once braided her hair, stitched her Halloween costumes, and clapped at every school play. I had loved her with everything I had. And it wasn't that she hadn't loved me back. Not entirely. Children love in bursts wild, bright, but often brief. It's not always unkindness. Sometimes it's just forgetting. But still, a single sentence in a caption. That's all it would have taken. Wearing my grandmother's pearls. Just that. But there was nothing. And sometimes the absence of something says more than any presence ever could. Back home, I sat in my room, the scent of lavender and silence, thick, as I waited for a thank you that never came. It was late afternoon, that strange hour where the sun comes in low, and everything in the house turns gold and shadow at once. I kept the curtains pulled open, hoping the light would make the room feel less empty, but the brightness only made the stillness sharper, like a stage set, after the actors have left. I sat on the bed, my feet not quite touching the floor, hands folded in my lap like I was expecting someone. I wasn't, not really. I'd placed my phone on the nightstand beside me, screen up, volume on. I never do that, the sound startles me, but I told myself I'd want to hear it ring right away. Just in case. The thank you should have come by now. A call, a message, even an emoji. I wasn't asking for much, just a small note of acknowledgement, the kind of thing people send without thinking. Loved the pearls, Grandma. Thank you again. But the phone stayed dark. It wasn't about the necklace anymore. Not really. It was about what it represented, years of showing up, of being the quiet constant. I didn't say no when she called late, needing a ride, or when she dropped off laundry during college breaks. I didn't complain when holidays grew more crowded and my seat got pushed further from the center of the table. I adapted like we all do, grateful, just to still be included. But now I wasn't even in the photos. I looked around my room, trying to anchor myself in something real, the old vanity with its wobbly mirror, my slippers tucked under the chair, the lavender sachet I'd kept in the drawer since her mother was a teenager. Everything smelled faintly of dust and dried flowers, like a memory sealed in a keepsake box. There was a small photograph on my dresser framed in brass. Her at 8 years old, standing in my garden in a pink dress with strawberries on it, her hair in crooked pigtails, one sock sliding down. She was holding a daisy like it was treasure beaming up at me. I'd taken that photo myself. I remember she asked me, "Can I keep this flower forever?" And I told her, "Flowers fade, sweetheart, but the moment won't." Now I wasn't sure that was true. I picked up the frame and held it gently in both hands. She'd been mine once, not in the way that mothers claim their children, but in the way that grandmothers carry the leftover love, the softer version of care, the quieter kind of protection. I gave her all that softness, all that sweetness, and now silence. I tried to rationalize it. She was busy. She probably hadn't opened every card yet. Maybe she was overwhelmed. Maybe thank yous weren't what people did anymore. It's possible. The world has changed. I've seen it. Things that once held meaning now pass by. In an instant, unwrapped gifts, unopened letters, unread feelings. But even knowing that it didn't ease the sting, I wondered if she even knew what she'd lost. Not the pearls, the gesture, the meaning, the weight of memory that came with it. A thread from me to her, delicate but strong, handed over in that little blue box. I wanted her to hold it, to understand it. Instead, I sat there with the lavender, with the silence, and with that growing pit in my stomach, the one that comes when you realize you're fading from someone's story without even a goodbye. It's a particular kind of loneliness, the kind that doesn't come from being alone, but from realizing someone you love no longer sees you in color. You become background, a footnote, the person who shows up but doesn't stay in the photo. I didn't cry. I'm past crying over things like this. Instead, I got up slowly, knees cracking, the way they always do now, and walked to the window. Outside, the garden was blooming again. The peonies first, then the iris. I planted them years ago, and every spring they return as if nothing has changed. Maybe that's the only kind of loyalty we get in the end from the things we put our hands in, the things we tend without asking for anything back. I stood there for a while watching the breeze move through the tall grass. I breathed it in, lavender dust and a whisper of something I couldn't name. And I said softly to no one at all, I was here, and I loved her, even if she no longer remembered. A stranger's message led me to an online listing my pearls sold for half their worth, casually described. It happened in the quietest way, like most heartbreaks do now. I wasn't even looking for anything. I was scrolling through my phone, a habit I've picked up lately, not because I enjoy it, but because it passes the time between cups of tea and dinner for one. A message had come in, not from her, from someone I didn't know, a woman with a soft-sounding name and a profile picture of a succulent plant in a ceramic pot. She said she'd seen a listing for a pearl necklace on a second-hand site and thought of me, remembering I'd once shown her a picture of a similar one at church. I clicked the link and the screen took a moment to load. My hands were trembling before I even knew why. And then there it was. My pearls. My wedding pearls, spread out on a pale gray velvet cloth, photographed with the kind of indifference you'd give to a pair of shoes or a handbag. The listing read, Vintage Pearl Necklace, Real Freshwater Pearls. Minor wear. Comes in original box. I recognized the box immediately. Blue velvet, slightly faded at the corners. The small chip on the latch from when I dropped it once on the bathroom floor in 1969. My name was never on it, but I knew. You always know what used to belong to you. It was being sold for $70. I stared at the price, blinking. It felt obscene. Not the amount itself, but the implication that the years, the history, the love could all be condensed into 2 digits and a photo. There was no mention of me, no story attached, no given with love by my grandmother, no worn with history. Just an item, an object, something to be sold and moved on from. I sat back in my chair. I didn't cry, not even then, but something inside me, something small and sacred, curled up tight, like an animal in the cold. I stared at the screen for a long time, as if it might change, as if the words might rewrite themselves into something softer, but they didn't. And that was the moment it stopped being about disappointment. That was the moment it turned into mourning. Because she didn't just forget to say thank you. She gave the gift away, sold it likely without a second thought, not out of malice, but out of disinterest. And maybe that's worse. Hate has weight, at least. It means you still matter. But indifference, that's where the air goes thin. I thought of the hands that held those pearls before me. My mother's with her cracked nails and soft wrists. Mine on my wedding day when the rain came through the church roof and I laughed instead of cried. And now some strangers. A buyer with no idea they were holding the last thread of something sacred. I didn't tell anyone. Not my daughter, not my sister who would have said, you should confront her. Not even the woman who sent me the message I didn't reply. What could I say? How do you explain that you've just seen your place in someone's heart and realized it's been cleared out like old furniture? I closed the listing and powered off the phone. I couldn't look at it anymore. I stood up slowly the way I always do now, hands on my knees for balance, and walked into the kitchen. I boiled water, reached for the same chipped mug I always use, and sat down at the table that still had 2 chairs, one never occupied anymore, but never removed. And I whispered to no one. So that's what I was worth. It wasn't bitterness. It wasn't even sadness exactly. It was something quieter, something older. The same feeling you get when you find a love letter from your youth and realize the person you wrote it to never read it. The pearls had been my offering, a way of saying you come from somewhere, you matter, because we mattered, and now they were gone, not lost but discarded. I traced my finger along the table's wood grain and thought of all the times I'd set plates for her there, spaghetti nights, tea parties with apple slices, times when she wore a paper crown and called me her queen. That little girl, where did she go? I suppose life takes us all, drags us into its tide. I don't blame her for growing up. I just wish she hadn't shed me like a skin she didn't need anymore. I finished my tea in silence, the cup warm between my palms. I held it like a memory, carefully, as if it might spill if I let go too quickly. And when I washed it, dried it, and put it back in the cupboard, I did so with the slow, deliberate grace of someone laying something to rest. I remembered holding her tiny hand, teaching her kindness, and wondering where that little girl had gone. It's strange the way the mind drifts backward when the present grows too sharp. After the listing, I found myself lost in old memories, more often not out of longing exactly, but out of need, like I had to remind myself that it really happened, that the love I gave her was real, that I hadn't imagined it. There was a day years ago when she was still small enough to swing her legs beneath the kitchen chair and ask questions about everything. I had baked lemon cookies, her favorite, though she always picked out the zest, and she'd spilled milk all over the table. She was horrified, eyes wide and lip trembling, thinking she'd done something terrible. I remember kneeling beside her, a towel in one hand, and saying, "Sweetheart, accidents are just part of life. What matters is how gently we clean them up." She threw her arms around me, then sticky and warm, and whispered, "You're the nicest person in the world." That same night, she insisted on writing me a note. Her mother had given her a sheet of pink stationery, and she scrawled in crooked letters, "I love you, Grandma. Thank you for the cookies and the milk and being nice." I kept it, still have it, folded neatly in the back of my recipe book, tucked between the lemon bars and the chocolate cake. I found it again recently. The paper had faded to a soft blush, the ink blurred just slightly at the edges, but the words were still there. Her little world captured in 7-year-old handwriting. I pressed it to my lips, then laid it in my lap and stared at it for a long while. Not out of sadness, but something deeper, the ache of contrast. That little girl once loved me with her whole heart, no filters, no distractions, just pure unshaped affection. She saw me, not as old, not as slow, not as a burden, but as someone magical, the way children do. Where did that girl go? I asked myself that so many times. Maybe she was still in there somewhere, buried beneath the grown woman with a busy life and online sales and gold necklaces that matched modern dresses. Or maybe she'd vanished entirely, replaced by someone who didn't remember where she came from. I didn't know which would hurt more. I suppose I thought that if you gave someone your best, they'd always carry it with them, that the kindness you taught them would plant roots. But life is long and people forget. Not just the bad, sometimes tragically, they forget the good too, the soft moments, the gentle teachings, the quiet hands that held theirs when they were too small to walk steady. I remember teaching her how to write thank you notes after birthdays, sitting beside her at the table, helping her spell appreciate and thoughtful. She used to ask, "Do I have to do this for everyone?" And I'd say, "No, darling, you get to." That's how I framed it, not an obligation, but a gift. Gratitude as grace. Gratitude as a way of saying, I saw your effort. I felt your love. And now here I was, the one left unseen, the one whose effort faded into silence. No note, no call, just the echo of my own teachings now tossed aside like those pearls. But maybe the hardest part wasn't even the forgetting. Maybe it was realizing that somewhere along the line I became optional. Not essential, not foundational, just extra. The kind of person you love when it's convenient, when it's soft and sweet, but set aside when life picks up speed. I don't say this in anger. Truly, I don't. I've lived long enough to know that resentment is a poison you drink hoping someone else will get sick. I've let go of anger more times than I can count. But this quiet pain, it doesn't leave as easily. It lingers, not loud but low, humming beneath everything like a tune you can't quite shake. So I do what I've always done. I remember. I keep the stories alive. I walk past the rose bush we planted when she turned 10, still growing wild beside the fence. I run my hand across the banister she once slid down in her pajamas, laughing like joy had no volume control. I reread the note in the recipe book and smell the ghost of sugar and lemon and milk spilled on linoleum. I remember who she was, who I was, what we had. Because even if she's forgotten, I haven't. And maybe that's the last role we grandmothers play, not the center of the new chapters, but the keepers of the old ones, the ones who hold the memories others no longer carry, the ones who remind the world even in silence. It happened, it mattered, she was loved. And I taught her how. Maybe it wasn't malice, just convenience, a need for money that outweighed sentiment, but it still pierced like betrayal. I've turned that idea over in my mind 1,000 times, like a stone in my palm, smooth on one side, jagged on the other. Maybe she didn't mean anything by it. Maybe the necklace didn't fit her style. Maybe she and her new husband needed some quick cash, and it was just another item to lighten the load. That's what young people say now, isn't it? Decluttering, minimalism. She probably thought she was being practical. But when something is given with love sold without thought, practicality becomes cruelty. Not sharp, not loud, just indifferent. And sometimes indifference is the deepest cut of all. I've tried to talk myself into forgiveness. Truly. Not the grand kind, not the biblical kind, just the kind that lets you breathe again, without your chest tightening every time you think of it. But there's a part of me that recoils not from her, but from the ease with which she let it all go. Because I would never have done that. Not at her age, not now, not ever. There are things you keep because someone's hands once held them. Things that carry breath laughter, tears inside their weight. I've kept an old hairpin that belonged to my mother, bent, tarnished, useless. But she wore it when she tucked her curls behind her ear, humming by the sink. It means nothing to anyone but me, and yet I'd never part with it. Not for any price. So how could she part with the pearls? Maybe I failed her. Maybe I didn't teach her how to value what matters. Maybe in all my quiet giving, I forgot to say the words out loud. This is sacred. This is not to be traded for something newer, shinier, easier. But I thought she knew. I truly did. And maybe she did know. Maybe that's what hurts the most. That she knew and still did it. I keep imagining her fingers brushing over the velvet box, opening it, seeing the note, holding the necklace in her hand. Did she hesitate? Did she feel anything? Or was it just another thing to post and price and package? I try to imagine the scene. Her sitting at her kitchen table, phone in hand, tapping out a listing. Maybe she needed the money for something important, rent, groceries, even something for the baby they're expecting. And if that's true, I could almost forgive her. I really could. I've gone without so others could have. I've eaten canned soup for a week so my daughter could buy school shoes. Sacrifice is in my bones. It's what women like me are made of. But still, she could have called, could have said, "Grandma, I'm sorry I can't keep them." I would have understood. I might have even helped her more. But instead, I found out from a stranger, through a link, on a screen. No explanation, no apology, just a quiet erasure. And I keep wondering if she needed help. Why didn't she ask? Why did she choose silence? Was I already so far removed from her world that I didn't even seem like an option? It's one thing to be poor. It's another to be unnecessary. I haven't told anyone what I found. There's something too humiliating about it, too naked. Admitting it would make it real, not just the loss of the pearls, but the loss of my place in her heart. And maybe I'm not ready for that. Maybe I'm still hoping there's a different explanation, one that doesn't leave me feeling like a relic someone's trying to forget. So I hold my tongue. I go about my days. I water the plants. I fold the laundry slowly the way I always have. I shuffle to the mailbox and back, pausing to wave at the neighbor who rarely waves first, and I keep the kettle warm. But inside there's a shift. Small, subtle, but steady, like a door closing a fraction more each day. It's not rage. It's not even disappointment anymore. It's something quieter, a quiet knowing. That she's not the little girl with strawberry dresses anymore. That I'm no longer the keeper of her secrets, the first person she runs to the last person she thinks of when she makes a choice. I'm someone she used to love. And perhaps that's just how it is. The natural order of things, the slow fading of one generation into the background of the next. But knowing that doesn't make it hurt less. It just makes the hurt quieter. So I sit in that quiet, and I try to remember how to breathe. I thought of my own wedding day, of how I'd never part with anything given in love, even now. It wasn't a grand affair, no chandeliers, no choreographed dances, no professional photographer weaving through the guests. Just a small church, the scent of lilies, and hands trembling as they reached for promises. I wore a dress my sister helped me sew, the hem uneven in the back, and the lace a bit too stiff. But I felt beautiful, not because of the dress, but because of what that day meant. Every detail was stitched with care, from the borrowed handkerchief in my sleeve to the pearl necklace fastened at my throat by the same hands that built the life we were about to share. He gave me a ring that day, simple, thin, the kind we could afford back then. I still wear it, worn smooth, now the engraving faded until it's nearly gone. But I don't need to read the words to remember them. My always, my only. That's what he'd asked the jeweler to carve. He told me once, years later, that he wasn't sure if they spelled it right. He couldn't afford to fix it if it wasn't. I've kept everything from that day. The pressed corsage petals in a book of poems, the ribbon from the bouquet, even the candle we lit together, now melted and stubby, tucked in a drawer. These things aren't valuable, not to anyone else. But they hold weight, history, intimacy, love distilled into objects that still hum with memory. So when I think of my granddaughter selling those pearls, not just wearing them once or leaving them forgotten in a drawer, but actively choosing to part with them, I don't understand it. I try, but I can't, because I have never let go of anything someone gave me in love. Even now, when my hands are slower and my eyes blur more easily, I reach for those little remnants. I wrap myself in the past, not because I can't let go, but because some things aren't meant to be let go of. Some things are meant to be kept, not for their beauty, but for the moment they carry. Sometimes I open my hope chest, not often, just when the air feels too heavy, and look through the tokens I've stored. A drawing she made me in 3rd grade, a scarf she knitted in college, uneven but warm, the world's best grandma mug chipped on the rim that she gave me one Christmas after we'd baked gingerbread all day. I've kept them all. But now I wonder, did she keep anything from me? I doubt it. Maybe I'm foolish. Maybe I'm one of the last who still believes in the soul of things, who thinks objects can carry memory the way a body carries breath. I used to believe that when you give someone something from your own hands, you're giving them a piece of yourself, a piece that should be cared for, cherished, respected. But I look around now and I see how quickly things move. Photos vanish into clouds, letters become texts, gifts become transactions, and maybe in all that speed the meaning slips through the cracks. Still, I can't help but wonder, if I had been younger, louder, shinier, would she have valued me more? It's not a pleasant thought. It doesn't fit the woman I've tried to be. But when you sit alone long enough, these questions float up like silt from the bottom of a still lake. Maybe it's not about the pearls at all. Maybe it's about the erasure of everything I tried to pass on. Not just things, but tenderness, tradition. The understanding that love isn't just said, it's kept. I think of my late husband sometimes, how he would have reacted. He was never sentimental in words, but he saved every card I ever gave him, even the silly ones. He'd say, "You gave it to me, so I'll keep it." That was his rule. Love given stays. And maybe that's what this is, the shock of realizing not everyone plays by the same rules. That love for some is lighter, easier to carry, easier to drop. But not for me, not ever. So I sit with that. I wear my old wedding ring, smooth and loyal. I light the stub of that candle on quiet nights and let the soft flicker pull me back, and I whisper a prayer for her, not one of correction or shame, but of hope, that one day she'll understand what it means to hold something sacred, that one day someone will give her something wrapped in memory, and she'll know better than to let it go. I set out 2 teacups the next Sunday, a habit I hadn't broken, though I always drank alone. It started years ago when she was still in school and would visit on the weekends. We'd sit at the kitchen table, her legs tucked beneath her steam, rising between us, as she drowned sugar cubes into chamomile. I taught her how to steep the tea properly, not too hot, not too long. She liked it light and sweet, and I kept a jar of honey just for her, though I preferred mine plain. After she moved away, I kept the habit. Every Sunday afternoon, 2 cups. I tell myself it was in case she stopped by or called or remembered. But really, I think it was my way of holding space, not just in the room, but in my life. Like keeping the door cracked open, just in case someone decided to come home. That Sunday after the wedding, after the listing, after the ache that had settled low in my ribs like a dull storm, I boiled the water, warmed the cups, and placed them on the table. I even put out the honey. The chair across from me stayed empty. I stirred my tea slowly, the spoon clinking against the ceramic like a soft, rhythmic metronome. The sound echoed more than usual. I looked out the window and watched a squirrel bury something in the garden, frantic and determined. Life always moving, always storing away for winters that may or may not come. I thought about stopping, about packing away the second cup for good, about closing that space inside me that had always waited for calls, for visits, for recognition. I thought maybe that was the wiser thing to do. But then what? If I stopped making space for the people I loved, even the ones who no longer made space for me, what would be left of me? I didn't want to become someone bitter. I've seen women harden like that. It starts small, a missed birthday, a forgotten thank you, and over time it calcifies. Their voices sharpen, their eyes dull, their hearts turn inward like fists. I didn't want that. So I kept the second cup, not because she deserved it, but because I did. Because keeping space is part of who I am. I've always made room at the table in my heart, in the quiet places people forget to notice. It's what I know. It's what I choose. Still, there was a hollowness that day that wouldn't lift. The tea tasted like memory, warm but thin. The silence didn't feel peaceful like it sometimes did. It felt like something was missing, like a painting with the center smudged out. I sat for a long while after the tea was gone, my fingers curled around the empty cup. I didn't cry. Not then. My eyes had dried up in a way that was more permanent, more practiced. But my chest ached, a tired, quiet ache that pulsed in time with the ticking clock above the stove. I thought of calling her. I picked up the phone and stared at her name in my contacts. I imagined the sound of her voice, brisk and cheerful, unaware of the weight I carried. I wondered what I'd say. Why did you sell them? Did you think I wouldn't notice? Did you ever mean to thank me? But none of those questions felt right, because what I really wanted to ask was, do I still matter to you? And that question, that one, felt too heavy to speak aloud, too dangerous, because if she hesitated even for a second, I wouldn't survive it. So I put the phone down slowly, quietly. I washed the cups and placed them back in the cabinet, the one with the glass door where the light catches on the edges and makes them glow. I lined them up side by side like always. 2 teacups. One life that waited. One that no longer came. The air in the kitchen felt still, like it was listening, like it had seen everything and chose to keep the secret with me. And I thought maybe that's just how it will be now. Maybe some of us live lives that echo, not because anyone calls back, but because we keep calling anyway. Because there's something brave in showing up even when no one knocks. Something dignified in laying out a second place at the table even if it remains untouched. I turned out the light as I left the room. The cups glimmered faintly behind the glass like ghosts. And I whispered to them, I'll try again next week. Weeks later, she called not to apologize, but to ask if I had a sewing machine she could borrow. I stared at the phone when it lit up her name blinking across the screen like a tiny miracle. My heart jolted before I could stop it. I even smiled, reflex instinct hope still flickering in a corner I hadn't sealed shut. I let it ring once, twice, then picked up with a breath I didn't know I was holding. Her voice was cheerful, rushed. Hi, Grandma, quick. Question, do you still have that old sewing machine you used to use? I need to hem some curtains and I don't want to buy one just for that. There was no how are you. No, I've been meaning to call. Just a question, just a need. I stood there, phone pressed to my ear, the warmth in my chest already beginning to cool. Yes, I said softly, my voice gentler than I felt. It's still here. Oh, great. I'll swing by tomorrow and pick it up. Thanks so much. Before I could say anything more, before I could ask how she was, or mention the pearls, or even just hear her linger, long enough to feel like she missed me, she said, "Love you," and hung up. I stared at the phone long after the call ended. Love you. Words tossed like keys on a counter. Light, habitual, weightless. It was a strange feeling to be wanted, but only for utility, like a drawer that's opened only when something's needed from it. The rest of the time closed, ignored, forgotten. I went to the hall closet, pulled out the sewing machine, and dusted it off. It was old but still reliable, heavy, real metal, not like the plastic ones now. I ran my fingers over it the way I might touch a photograph, as if it could explain something. I used to sew for her, Halloween costumes, pillowcases with her initials, once a little doll dress with a ribbon that matched her hair. She'd sit beside me, wide-eyed, fascinated by the rhythm of the needle, the hum of creation. I'd let her guide the fabric, sometimes holding her hand steady over mine. She once told me, "You make things feel safe." I carried those words like a secret bouquet for years, and now here she was, not remembering that, not revisiting the warmth, just asking for the machine. I should have felt honored, trusted at least to still be useful, but all I felt was the space between us, widening a chasm filled with things unsaid. When she came by the next day, she didn't come in. She stayed on the porch car, still running in the driveway. She smiled, thanked me, took the machine without looking me fully in the eye. "You sure you don't need it?" she asked. "I haven't used it in years," I said. That part was true, but not for lack of want. She hugged me quickly, more of a pat really, and said, "I'll bring it back in a week." Her voice was bright, busy. Then she was gone. I stood in the doorway long after her taillights disappeared. The breeze lifted the hem of my cardigan. Somewhere down the street a dog barked, and a child laughed. But in my little pocket of the world, everything had fallen still again. Inside the empty space where the sewing machine had been looked larger than it should have. A small absence, but it echoed. I went to make tea, my hands slower now. Only 1 cup, no honey. As I stirred, I realized something. She didn't mean to hurt me. I truly believe that. She wasn't cruel. She was simply elsewhere. Her world no longer intersected with mine, except when it required something. A tool, a favor, a memory she could borrow without fully acknowledging. But what she didn't understand is that we don't exist just to be needed. We exist to be known, to be remembered for more than what we once gave, to be loved, not just when we're useful, but when we're quiet, sitting alone with soft hands and softer hopes. That night I sat in the armchair and read the same chapter 3 times before I realized I hadn't absorbed a word. My mind kept drifting not to her face now, but to the child she once was, the one who'd fall asleep on my chest, trusting that I would keep the monsters away. I wondered if she'd bring the machine back. I wondered if she'd call again. I wondered if I would still set out the second teacup next Sunday. And I knew I would, because that's who I am. Even when the door stays shut, even when the call never comes, even when the pearls are gone and the sewing machine is out of reach, I am still the woman who waits, who remembers, who loves in the quiet. Even when no one's listening. There's a box in my closet full of gifts meant for her, untouched, waiting now, unnecessary. I hadn't opened it in years, not really. I'd added to it here and there, but always quickly, without ceremony. It was my secret offering, my quiet hope stitched into objects. The box isn't special, just an old shoebox from when department stores still wrapped purchases in paper and string. But inside is every little gesture I never got to give. There's the quilt I began stitching the year she graduated college, her name embroidered in the corner in lilac thread. I remember sitting by the window that summer, sewing with sore fingers and soft light falling across my lap. I'd pictured her spreading it across a bed in her first apartment, wrapping herself in it, on tired nights thinking of me. There's a locket I bought at a flea market, silver delicate with room inside for 2 photos. I had planned to put in one of her and one of me. I never got around to printing them. The locket still sits nestled in tissue paper, unopened. There's a recipe book I started compiling, handwritten on index cards, each one stained with memory. Apple pie crust from scratch. Chicken soup for colds and heartbreak. Grandma's holiday fudge, don't forget the pinch of salt. I imagined her thumbing through it one day, maybe with her own daughter, maybe telling stories I never got to tell myself. All of it is still there, untouched, gathering dust but not meaning. And I don't know what to do with it now. Because giving a gift is different when the person no longer sees it as a thread between souls, when they've already severed the cord, without even realizing it. To give now would feel like throwing paper boats into the sea, fragile floating but bound to sink. So I leave the box alone. Sometimes I pull it out just to touch the lid, just to remember what it felt like to believe she'd want what I'd made for her, that she'd understand, that my love had a place in her future. But now I know she has other threads, other anchors. I'm not part of her orbit anymore, not in the way I hoped I'd always be. And maybe that's the hardest truth. Aging gives you realizing you can't follow everyone you love into the rest of their lives. Sometimes you're only meant to be a chapter, maybe a paragraph, a line. You raise them, protect them, pour everything you are into them, and then you become a page they don't reread. I think I started the box to stay relevant, to remain in her future even if I wasn't there to see it. But futures change, people change, and sometimes they don't look back. I don't fault her, not entirely. The world she lives in now doesn't make space for slow things, for hand-sewn quilts and written recipes and boxes tucked away for someday. Everything is immediate, disposable, digital. You don't save a locket when there's a camera on your phone. You don't hang onto a blanket when you can buy one that matches your decor. You don't treasure a pearl necklace when it doesn't match the filter you've chosen for your wedding photos. Still, I miss being someone's keeper of memory. I miss being known in the way only a grandmother can be known, not just for what you did, but for how you made them feel, safe, warm, uncomplicated. Now I'm complicated. I'm the silence on the other end of a call she doesn't make, the figure in her rearview mirror, fading. The box stays in the closet. I dust it now and then, but I don't add to it anymore. Because I finally understand something I didn't before: love given doesn't always reach the place you aim it. Sometimes it lands in a drawer, sometimes in a stranger's hands, and sometimes it never lands at all. But that doesn't make it wasted. It just makes it mine. So I keep the box, not for her, not anymore. For me, because I was the woman who made things with her hands, who planned ahead, who stitched care into corners no one else could see. That woman deserves to be remembered, even if only by herself. And as I sit on the edge of the bed box at my feet, sunlight pooling on the floor like honey, I whisper something I wish she'd said. Thank you. I see you. I remember. Because sometimes the only voice you have left is your own. And that has to be enough. I walked into the pawn shop where the pearls had ended up, not to reclaim them, just to see. It was a small place tucked between a closed laundromat and a vape store, the kind of place you'd never notice unless you were looking for something lost. The bell above the door jingled when I entered, though the sound didn't match the weight I felt pressing in my chest. Inside, the air smelled like old metal and forgotten stories. Rows of guitars leaned against cracked walls. Watches glittered behind smudged glass, and cameras from another lifetime blinked like tired eyes. I walked slowly as if my memories had mass and could knock something over. The man behind the counter barely looked up. Young, tattooed, kind eyes, but distracted. Let me know if you're looking for something specific, he muttered, already turning back to his screen. I nodded, though I didn't speak. I wasn't sure what to say. I wasn't there to buy. I wasn't even there to ask. I just wanted to know. I needed to see them one last time, to know they still existed even if they were no longer mine. I moved past the rows of things people had let go of, not always because they wanted to, but because they had to. Wedding rings, tools, trinkets, a stuffed bear missing one eye. I wondered about the stories behind them all. Who gave up what, and why? Then there they were. Not in a display case, not behind glass, just resting inside a tray with a few other necklaces. Tangled slightly, one pearl turned the wrong way, as if even they didn't quite know where they belonged anymore. I reached out not to touch, just to hover my hand above them, close enough to feel, but not enough to reclaim. They were mine, and yet not anymore. I didn't cry. I thought I might. But what I felt was stranger than grief. It was something like tenderness, a soft farewell, like visiting a grave and knowing the person you lost isn't there, not really, but you go anyway because part of love is saying goodbye, even when no one hears it. The box was gone, probably tossed or reused. That blue velvet box that had held 3 generations of women in its quiet lining discarded. I almost smiled. There's something absurd about how little the world needs to forget, something that once meant everything. I turned to leave. The man at the counter looked up again and said, "Find what you were looking for." I met his eyes. They were curious but not unkind. "No," I said, "but I found what I needed." He nodded, not understanding, and I walked back out into the sun. Outside, the air was brighter than I expected. It hit my eyes sharp, made them water, but not from sorrow, from something cleaner, lighter. I had feared seeing them would break something inside me, but it didn't. If anything, it gave me clarity. The pearls weren't her betrayal. They were just the shape it took. And seeing them like that, stripped of story, stripped of weight, it helped me let go of the part of me still waiting for her to understand. Some things don't get understood. Some gifts don't land. And some love stories, because that's what we had in a way, end, not in argument, but in fading. I walked slowly, letting each step feel deliberate, not dramatic, just real. My cane tapped the sidewalk rhythmically, steady as a second heartbeat. I passed storefronts and strangers. I passed a mother holding her toddler, wiping his nose with the sleeve of her coat. I smiled softly. She didn't see me. That was all right. The world doesn't see you the same way once you've given all your shine away. But there's still dignity in the dullness, still grace in the quiet corners. I stopped at a cafe and bought myself a small coffee, just milk, no sugar. Sat by the window and let the cup warm my palms. I thought of the pearls one last time, imagined them hanging from someone else's neck, now someone who'd never know the weight they carried. And then I let them go. Right there, over coffee. I didn't forgive her, not fully, but I released the part of me that kept turning back. Not everything lost needs to be found again. Some things, when they leave, are simply making space. At her baby shower, no one knew who I was. I smiled politely and left early unnoticed. I'd been invited a group text sent with a balloon emoji and a vague hope you can make it, the kind that feels more like obligation than welcome. Still, I went. I wrapped a gift carefully, a handmade blanket I'd crocheted over the course of 3 quiet weeks, soft yellow and pale cream with little scalloped edges. Not trendy, not expensive, but made with hands that had held her once, when she weighed no more than a cantaloupe. The venue was loud, one of those new cafes with exposed brick and string lights, and an open kitchen that clattered like a storm. There were paper streamers and pink cupcakes and shiny foil balloons that spelled her baby's name. Everyone was young, shiny-haired, phone-lit. Laughter bounced off every wall like ping-pong balls. I stood near the entrance for a moment, the gift tucked in the crook of my arm, waiting to be noticed, waiting to belong. She was seated at the center of it all, glowing, surrounded by friends who called her by childhood nicknames I no longer recognized. Eventually, someone approached me, a girl in boots, far too tall for such a warm day. "Are you from her husband's side?" I shook my head. "I'm her grandmother." Her eyebrows lifted slightly and she said, "Oh, I think she mentioned you," then turned, already gone before the sentence finished. I found a seat along the wall near a ficus plant and a pile of unopened gifts. I placed my blanket on the stack. No one noticed. I watched her laugh and open presents. Baby monitors, plastic tubs of diapers, something that beeped and connected to an app. Everything sleek, efficient. When she reached my gift, she paused only briefly. "A blanket," she said. "Cute." then moved on. The next gift had her squealing some brand-name stroller with an attachment for smoothies. I wasn't expecting fanfare. I wasn't even expecting gratitude, really. But I had hoped for a look, a glance, a flicker of recognition, something that said, "This one's from home. This one's made of memory." But there was nothing. Eventually I got up to use the restroom, my knees creaking, my balance cautious. On the way, I passed two girls chatting. "I think that's her grandma," one whispered. Which one the other said without even turning to look. It didn't sting as much as I expected. It just felt distant, like I was watching someone else's life, someone else's family. I left after an hour. Quietly. I waved at her from the door, but she didn't see. Or maybe she did and was too busy to wave back. I didn't make a scene. I never do. On the drive home, the blanket stayed in my mind not for what it was, but for what it had meant to me. Every loop of yarn had carried a prayer, a hope, a quiet blessing stitched by candlelight. I'd held it to my cheek when it was finished, imagining it wrapped around her child. A continuation, a soft bridge across generations. Now it would be folded into a drawer, if not given away entirely. Back home, I changed into my slippers and boiled water for tea. 1 cup, plain. The house was quiet again, like it always is, but this time the quiet wasn't empty. It was filled with a new kind of clarity, the kind that arrives not with anger, but with acceptance. Some doors don't close with a slam. They close gently, silently, without a knob ever being turned. And when you look back, you realize they were never fully open to begin with. I sat by the window as the sun dipped low, its light softening everything it touched. The roses in the yard had begun to wilt, their edges curled inward, like they were tired of blooming for no one. And I thought, this is how it happens, not in a dramatic betrayal, not in a cruel word, but in the accumulation of silences, the missing thank yous, the unopened boxes, the fading glances. I'm still her grandmother. That title doesn't get revoked. But I've learned that being a grandmother, and being her grandmother, the one she turns to, leans into, reaches for, are not the same. And perhaps now I am only the first one. Still, I loved her. Love her. Will likely always love her. But I see now love doesn't keep you at the center. Sometimes it keeps you on the edge, quietly cheering for someone who no longer looks your way. I finished my tea, folded the blanket across my knees, and whispered into the stillness. I was here. I brought my gift. I loved. And no one needed to know but me. I poured everything into a letter, not to blame but to explain. It's still in my drawer. I wrote it one morning when the house felt too heavy, when the air seemed to settle like dust in my lungs, and nothing, not the light, not the tea, not even the birdsong outside, could lift the weight of being invisible. I sat at the kitchen table with my good pen and a sheet of ivory stationery I'd been saving, not for special occasions, but for something that mattered, and this mattered even if only to me. The words came slowly at first, hesitant, afraid of what they might reveal, but once I began, they poured out soft, steady, sure. I didn't write to accuse her. I wrote to tell her who I was, who I had been, what she might have forgotten or perhaps never fully seen. I told her about the night she was born, how I sat in the waiting room with my knitting and my worry pacing in a hospital hallway that smelled like bleach and new beginnings. I told her how I cried when I held her, because I hadn't expected to love someone so immediately, so completely ever again. I wrote about the time she lost her first tooth and ran straight to me, not her mother, how she told me secrets that weren't important but felt sacred, which boy she liked, How she hated green beans, how she dreamed of having a horse someday, even though we lived in a neighborhood where the only animals were squirrels and strays. I reminded her of the afternoons I picked her up from school when her parents worked late, how I'd make her cinnamon toast and play her favorite records while she did her homework on the carpet. I wrote about the pearls, of course, but gently. I told her where they had come from my wedding day, my mother's hands a moment in history now erased. I didn't say I'd seen the listing. I didn't tell her the price. I only wrote I gave them to you hoping you'd feel how loved you were, not by the necklace itself, but by everything it carried. I told her about the box in the closet, the unwrapped gifts, the letters never mailed. I wrote, I've always saved things for you, not because you asked, but because I believed there would be a moment when you'd want them. I didn't ask her to apologize. I didn't even ask her to write back. I ended the letter with something simple. I don't know if I've ever truly said this, but I'm proud of the woman you're becoming. I hope one day when the world grows quiet around you, you'll think of me, not just as the person who gave you things, but as someone who always, always loved you. Love always, and only Grandma. When I finished, I folded the letter into thirds and slipped it into an envelope. I addressed it, even put a stamp on it, but I didn't send it. I placed it in my dresser drawer just beneath the lavender sachet and the old photos I keep in a small leather album. Every so often I reach for it, not to reread, but to remind myself that I tried, that I gave her something she can find someday, should she ever feel the silence in her life and wonder where it came from. Maybe she'll discover it one day. After I'm gone, perhaps. Maybe she'll open the drawer, find the letter, and sit down with it in the late afternoon light. Maybe she'll read my words aloud in the stillness of her own kitchen, with a child on her lap, or a quiet ache in her chest. Maybe she'll finally understand what I meant, what I was offering, what I gave. Or maybe not. Maybe it will stay unread like so many other things between us. But that's the thing about love in my language. It doesn't need to be received to be real. It only needs to be spoken. And I spoke it. Ink to paper, memory to silence. A bridge built across distance not measured by miles, but by forgetting. The letter is still in the drawer, folded carefully, waiting. Not for her, for me, because I needed to write it. I needed to say the things I never said when she still looked at me like I was the sun. And even if she never knows I do, I know I loved her as best I could. I know I gave her everything, even in silence. One morning, I didn't set out the teacups. I folded them away and made peace with the quiet. There was no great decision, no dramatic gesture, just a pause. I opened the cabinet, stared at the matching cups sitting there like loyal dogs, and closed the door again. I reached for a mug instead, plain white chipped on one edge. It felt heavier in my hand, more solid, less like waiting. The silence in the house didn't change. What changed was me. I didn't glance at the phone. I didn't check the mail with a flicker of hope. I didn't hover near the door, listening for a knock. I boiled the water. I sat in my chair. I drank my tea, alone, without ceremony, without expectation. And it was all right. It wasn't happiness. It wasn't sadness either. It was something quieter, like a curtain drawn after a long performance, not because the audience demanded it, but because the story had ended and it was time. And I looked around my house, my life, and saw it as it really was, not as I had hoped it would be. The blankets I had folded and saved for future babies who might never come visit. The framed photos, once central, now slowly edged out by more recent, more filtered snapshots on someone else's phone. The notes, the gifts, the holidays. I had filled a lifetime with meaning. But meaning needs a place to land, and sometimes the people you love don't make room for it. That's not cruelty, that's life. The generations roll forward like waves, each one louder than the last, each one rushing to its own version of the shore. And those of us left standing on the sand, holding out shells and smooth stones, we aren't forgotten on purpose. We're just quiet, too quiet to be heard above the roar. But that morning I didn't ache. I didn't feel wounded. I felt still. And in that stillness, I understood something I had been trying to anchor myself in someone else's life for too long. I had been reaching backward, hoping she'd turn around, but she won't. Not now. Maybe not ever. And that's all right too. Because while I waited, I lived. I cooked. I sewed. I remembered. I loved. And though it didn't return to me the way I hoped, it filled me. It made me whole in a way I hadn't appreciated until now. So I put the second cup away. I folded the napkins and straightened the chairs and stopped checking the window every time a car door slammed. I still love her. That hasn't changed. But I no longer expect her to love me in return the way I once needed. She loves in her own way, busy, distant light, as a text message, brief as a smile over her shoulder. And I've come to see that as enough for her, so it must be enough for me. Later that afternoon, I took a walk, just around the block. The sky was pale, the air damp. I passed the neighbor's rose bush and paused to breathe it in. It smelled faintly of soap and summer. I touched one petal and felt its softness, a quiet beauty asking nothing. That's how I want to be now, quiet beauty, no longer asking. When I returned, the house welcomed me with its familiar hush, my chair by the window, my book with the corner folded, the letter still safe in the drawer, the box untouched. I made dinner for one, ate slowly, washed the dishes in warm water, and left them to dry in the rack. Not because I was waiting for someone, just because I was here. I have become my own company. Not lonely, just alone. There's power in that. A kind of power no one claps for, no one posts about, but it grows steady and real like roots beneath the earth. I sat by the window as evening fell and thought I no longer need to be remembered to remember who I am. I know what I gave. I know how I loved. I know who I've been even when no one else does. And now finally I know how to sit in the quiet, not waiting, not wanting, just being. And that is more than enough. I found a small ring from my own mother, tucked in a drawer, and slipped it onto my own hand. It had been there all along, buried beneath old receipts, spare buttons, and a handkerchief embroidered with fading initials. I wasn't even looking for it. I'd opened the drawer in search of a safety pin, something trivial. But instead, there it was, that little gold ring, simple, quiet, warm from years of forgetfulness. I picked it up, and a part of me held my breath. My mother hadn't worn it often. Her fingers were swollen most days from arthritis, and rings had become more trouble than pleasure. But she'd kept this one tucked away, as if saving it for something or someone. It was the ring her sister had given her years before I was born, a plain gold band with a faint vine etched along the edge. Not valuable, not even especially beautiful, but it had weight. Not in gold, in meaning. I turned it over in my fingers for a long while, the metal cool against my skin. Then, without thinking, I slid it onto my right hand. It fit. Not perfectly, my knuckle caught slightly the way it always does these days, but once it settled, it felt right, like something returning to where it belonged. I looked at it for a long time. It didn't sparkle. It didn't catch the light. But it glowed in that quiet, unbothered way things do when they've been waiting patiently. I've given so many things away in my life. Gifts wrapped in soft tissue, words wrapped in silence. Time, patience, tenderness all poured out without a ledger. I don't regret it. That's who I am. That's what I was made for. But that this one ring I kept for myself. And maybe that's what this chapter of my life is meant to be. Not about holding on to people who've let go, but about returning to the pieces of myself I set aside in the process. I wear it now every day. It's a secret no one asks about, and that's fine. I don't need to explain it. The people I used to explain myself to are busy elsewhere. That's not bitterness, it's just distance. But this ring, it anchors me. Not to them, to me. It reminds me that I came from somewhere, that I was once a daughter too, that long before I was a mother, or a grandmother, or a giver of pearls and blankets and patience, I was just a girl who mattered, a girl with her own hands, her own rhythm, her own story. And I'm finding her again, not loudly, not all at once, but gently, the way spring finds its way back through soil and frost. Sometimes when I look down at my hands, aged now wrinkled wise, I don't see what's missing anymore. I see what remains, the lines of labor, the softness of memory, the steadiness that doesn't ask to be seen but simply is. The pearls are gone. The thank yous never came. The second teacup stays behind glass. But this ring, this I carry forward. It's not a symbol for anyone else. It doesn't need to be posted or praised. It's mine. And that feels finally like enough. In a world that's always asking you to give your time, your things, yourself, maybe the bravest thing a woman can do is keep something just for her. So I will. Sometimes at night I sit with the lights low, my blanket pulled around my legs, and I let the quiet come all the way in. No distractions, no duties, no one to call or wait for. Just me, the hum of the old clock, the sigh of the house as it settles, and the steady rhythm of my own breath. The stillness doesn't scare me anymore. It comforts me like the softest voice saying, "You have done enough." I've given more than most will ever see. I've loved across decades, stitched my care into people who barely remember the shape of my hands. I've kept traditions, kept secrets, kept teacups and recipes and forgiveness in places no one ever asked to look. And though they didn't always understand, I do. I understand now that my worth doesn't depend on their attention. It never did. They forgot me, but I never forgot myself. I let go of the pearls. I wrote the letter. I kept the ring. And in doing so, I found a quieter kind of joy, one that doesn't wait to be noticed, one that doesn't chase anyone down the hallway of their own forgetting. Because I know now I don't have to be loud to be lasting. I don't need to take up space in their lives to be whole in mine. I gave them silence, and in it I found peace.